Welcome. I am Gar, back at, what do we call this? We call this Gar and the a cappella shower time, hour. I'm going to sing a little ditty tonight, a tune that's dear to my heart from my childhood. However, before I do that, I'm not much of a political bug. However, because of the things that occurred over the past week, I feel that I'd like to say something. I have a rather captive audience because you're whomever is watching me right now. Could either turn me off or keep watching. So here goes. We had rather horrific events in Orlando this past week. It was the worst mass shooting in history, where those poor souls at that nightclub in Orlando were murdered, cold-blooded murder. About 50 or 60 of them, and then another 50 or 60 of them were critically injured. Tragedy. A tragedy that will live on forever, and especially with the mothers and the fathers and the relatives and the close friends and the lovers. There's nothing we could do to bring that back now. We can, though, do something about it now. Everything that happens for a reason. You can either look on the dark side or you can look on the light side. I choose to look on the side of the light. Don't let this incident of homophobia, of irrational prejudice, don't let it stir up more feelings, more actions. That simulate what the shooter felt. Don't take it out on our Islamic or Muslim brothers and sisters. This irrational prejudice that's become rampant in our society today, in our culture, this hateful bigotry that I see is coming out of this, it disgusts me. It makes me throw up times 3. Don't feel more prejudice and more bigotry than the shooter who murdered and mutilated over 100 people. If you do, then you're just as bad as he is, or he was. Don't use this as a reason to hate. Use this as a reason to love. There's an anti-Muslim mania that's spreading throughout the United States. This is the United States of America, the land of the free, the land of freedom. Free of religious persecution. I relate to this extremely well because I was born Jewish. And I had 6 million men, women, and children that are my ancestors. 2 million. 2 million beautiful, loving, cherubic, innocent little boys and girls that were murdered. A mere 70 years ago. In the history of time, that's nothing. That's less than a blink of an eye. That's less than a piece of sand on a beach with trillions of pieces of sand. That just happened. And there's even people in our society today that deny the Holocaust. It's inclusion, not exclusion. As our Trump, our presidential candidate, he's doing as a demagogue. I didn't want to get political and I didn't want to talk about the presidential candidates, but this person, it just personally irritates the crap out of me. Why? Because he comes from my neighborhood. I grew up in the Bronx, New York. And he smashed the top politicians in our country. He didn't just beat them in the primary. He smashed them because he's a bully. He's a bigot. And he uses techniques that are so unethical, so immoral. And anybody that wants to vote for this man has to look at themselves in the mirror and say, do you want that man to lead you and your children to the promised land? Not I. Not I. I'm going to tell you a real quick story. I went to my doctor's office about a year and a half ago, in Calabasas, rich white town. And the nurse there is a Latina. And she comes in the room. This is when the primary just started. It just started. And Trump was one of 16 people. And I didn't think anything of it. I said, he's just a television personality. He's a broken down hypocrite. He's a businessman who makes people think he was successful. He never was successful. He makes people think he was smart, that he went to Wharton. It's not true. He phonied up his records. He did just like Hitler did. For the record, and I'm rather controversial of a person, is that I thought he was a smart man. I thought he was a brilliant man. He wrote a book about the art of the deal, and he's a big macher, and he's got the Apprentice show, and he can tell people what to do, and he can fire people, and he's got an empire. It's all bullshit. The man was a wealthy, his father was a wealthy man. He didn't come from poor upbringings like I. I came from the Bronx projects. My dad made $75 a week. Our rent was $95 a month. So Donald Trump, he lived in my neighborhood, but he lived on the rich side of the tracks. I lived on the right side of the tracks. I lived on the side of the tracks that believed in inclusion, that believed in tolerance. Multiculturalism. You don't scorn somebody. You don't frown somebody. You don't exclude somebody because of their religion, because of the color of their skin, because of their gender, LGBT, because of their age, because of their size, because of their looks, ableism versus disableism, because they may have bipolar, or they may have a broken leg, they may be crippled, so therefore they don't rate. That's what happened in ancient Greek times. We're not in ancient Greek times anymore. We had a lot of great things that came out of the Greco-Roman Empire. That's not one of them. Ironically, the roots of the Nazi Germany is connected to ancient Greek Greco-Roman Empire. I don't know if you knew that. It's true. Ironically, I don't know if anybody knew this, I'll share this with you, that the homosexual movement, gay rights movement, started in Germany in the 1800s. Started in the 1860s, by a doctor who was sexually abused as a young man, and then he became homosexual, and he built a movement, and he believed that the gay men, the homosexual men of Germany of the 1800s were like the men of the ancient Greek Empire, that they were special. They're not like most of the people in society, and they believed in being the Aryan race. They were the tough people. So that was the roots of the Nazi Party. The man that became the head, his name was Ernest Röhm, and he was himself a homosexual. He was Hitler's close buddy. Hitler was his protege, and so I believe very strongly that Hitler was either a homosexual or he was a homosexual sympathizer. However, because he had manic depressive bipolar type 2 disorder, Hitler, he didn't know what the heck was going on. So he went ahead, and even though he sympathized, and he was himself also homosexual, he, in his irrationality, he went ahead and murdered gay people of Nazi Germany, along with my Jewish brothers and sisters, and the dear little children. He was a sexual deviant. And this is what we have today. We have very similar actions that are going on today in America. We have economic problems. We had economic problems in Nazi Germany. A loaf of bread went from $1 to $30 overnight. We have young men and women that are graduating college that don't have a job. They can't find a job. They have student loan debt that's sky high, and they can't pay it off. There's a lot of discontent in America today, and I don't know if our politicians are addressing the real issues. Hitler was a sexual deviant. And we have people today that idolize that deviant. He was what was called a pederastic. Look it up. Pederastic. Similar to pedophile. It's P-E-D-E-R-A-S-T-I-C. And it meant that he loved to have sex with little boys. Disgusting. This is a man that we have people in our society today that actually revere him. He was a sickening, disgusting disgrace to humanity. And then he followed it up. He followed it up with the murder of 6 million people. And I'll say one last thing about him before I stop here. Is that his buddy Ernest Röhm started the movement that brought Hitler to power in the 1920s, and it was called the Brown Shirts. And these brown shirts were basically homosexual young men that believed that they were special. Ernest Röhm, who was the originator of this movement in the early 1900s, Hitler's tutor or idol, he himself was homosexual. And so he only hired, if you wanted to become, in fact, if you wanted to become a member of his inner circle, the beginnings of Nazism, you had to be a homosexual, and you had to be a deviant homosexual. You had to do things that were disgusting. Basically, you had to be a pederastic. You had to, I said it earlier. So this man, Röhm, he had people bringing the high school boys to him while he was now setting up Hitler's Nazi movement. It was called the Brown Shirts. They were bullies. They destroyed Jewish homes, businesses. We had Kristallnacht in 1939. That was done by the Brown Shirts. They later became known as the Stormtroopers. Sturmabteilung. I studied German, so Sturmabteilung, called the Stormtroopers. And that Stormtrooper movement of 2.5 million strong, 2.5 million, were in fact headed by Ernest Röhm, who was a devout, deviant homosexual. So the irony of this all is that Hitler, who is the poster child, if you will, of homophobia, of prejudice, of racism, of everything that's wrong in human civilization, is because of his bipolarism. He actually loved it and hated it. And so that's what we have today. We have a culture in America that I call the bipolar culture. We have the followers of Donald Trump whom are rationalizing that he is going to make a difference. He's going to bring jobs back to America. This is a man that, I have to laugh. This is a man that never worked a day in his life. He's put on a show, and you know what? So many people in America are falling for it, hook, line, and sinker. So going back very quickly, I said it earlier, I went into the doctor's office.